vu vơ. Ba bốn lần sai lời hứa, em nhất định không thèm nữa. Tội lắm em ơi, nào anh muốn đâu sai hẹn với em. Nhưng thế tuần qua ai dặn mình đi đúng giờ, quên mất một giây mong chờ sẽ là bao lâu. Anh hứa chẳng bao giờ giấu, nói dối thật là xấu. Đừng có khôn ngoan vội che lối lầm chẳng ai thèm nghe. Em sao anh nghi ngờ quá, vì đã hẹn ai không ngóng chờ. Không yêu nên đâu cần nhớ, mới bắt người ta ra đứng chờ. Thì xin lỗi em một lần nữa, từ đây sắp tới anh xin chưa. Vừa nghe nói anh giờ không trễ hẹn, lòng thấy vui nhiều. Em nói một câu em để em làm.
Other link is definitely not working.
Mới biết tình yêu chân thành rất là vị tha. Hai tiếng thủy chưa ôi đẹp quá, xin giữ tròn câu ta hẹn hứa. Mình sống cho nhau vì nhau tất cả dành cho tình ta.
Link not working.
Yeah, I gotta figure it out right now. Right. Cool, we're ready to go.
All right, fake ribbon cutting. Good evening, all. No, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sorry about the technical issues. I'm sure this is actually my first Zoom event, so I feel like people are being pretty patient with us and patient in general. We decided to do this event because, so Les and I representing SAMASAMA, which is about going into its 4th year, in which we take May, which is Asian AAPI month, to do a collective exhibit. And this year, obviously with COVID, we weren't able to do an in-person exhibit. But that didn't mean that we didn't want to celebrate in some kind of way or highlight the artists that participate, and really just kind of take time to be a platform for some artists that are really sharing some really amazing stories and perspectives. So we met Barrett here from the Sustainable Culture Lab. I've met him many times ago, and I knew this is going to be a good opportunity for us to actually execute the conversation that SAMASAMA still really wanted to have, but sort of like the next level. So, you know, if you're not able to participate in an in-person show, sometimes there is a little bit of that missing factor, that missing element that an image can kind of give you within a gallery. So in order to fill a little bit of that space, and again, kind of take that opportunity to fill an even more important part, is to have a really much more deeper philosophical conversation about the work in itself. So SAMASAMA 2.0 right now with this event. I'm really excited that we're going to be partnering to do this event together, Diaspora People's Month. It was really kind of just grown out of a mathematical equation by Barrett, which is pretty cool. Black History Month being February 2, AAPI month being 5, right? So 7 is July, and it is the month that we do celebrate Independence Day, right? How ironic and contradictory. So here we are with Diaspora People's Month, and you know, it's very reflective of the artists that participate in SAMASAMA, because it's not really just Asian American, Pacific Islander artists that we highlight, but really we celebrate and share the works of really just folks of the greater diaspora community, people of color. And that was something that's always really important. You know, it wasn't just highlighting the AAPI community itself. But, you know, I'll let Barrett kind of speak a little bit about the Sustainable Culture Lab, and then we'll kind of get going with the artists. Thank you all for slowly joining in.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Seda. And yeah, so the Sustainable Culture Lab, we're a new cultural think tank based out of DC, and our work focuses on, it's kind of heavy, but we focus on this word ethnocide, which is the destruction of culture while keeping the people. And we apply that language to the transatlantic slave trade. And that gives like a new lens for viewing America, where, you know, if you acknowledge that the goal of the transatlantic slave trade was to destroy African culture while keep in the bodies of African people, you can then see how problematic that would be and how that can shape a society. And so with that language of ethnocide, it gives like a new framework for talking about the importance of culture and how America like destroys culture in many ways. And so as a cultural think tank, our focus is not only on combating and articulating this language of ethnocide, but also to do things to elevate and enhance culture. Because if you live in a space that is destroying culture or devaluing culture, putting efforts and support behind creating culture is a perfect way to counter that. And so as a philosopher, I think art and music and other sorts of like cultural expression beyond language and like dense philosophical books are really important to get complex ideas across to people. And so, you know, being connected with Seda and getting more like connected into the artist community in DC and around the US and the world, it's really important for our work and our mission. And so this event is significant because it allows us to merge philosophy and art and articulate how meaningful a lot of the art or all the art that will be on display is in a really unique way. And so that's what we do. And, you know, you can check us out. It's, you know, scl.community. And yeah.
So the first week that we're really kicking it off with in July is Philosophy, Art, and Action. And it's really kind of a piggyback on our first conversation together before we actually created Diaspora People's Month. You know, SCL and SAMASAMA, a couple weeks ago, we did a conversation about philosophy, art, and politics, how they're intertwined, how they influence one another, how they inspire one another. So just like before we really delve into it with the artists, the way that we kind of look at it with art is that it's really kind of philosophy in action. It's quite a reflection of our culture, where we're at. You know, just kind of taking a sort of deconstructing this idea that philosophy is sort of a classical thing. Obviously, when we think about it, we are kind of thinking of the classics, right? But I think as time goes, culture, you know, we evolve, philosophy evolves, and in order to kind of make some movement, really reflect the people, the culture that we live on, is the artists. You know, the artists are truly the ones that are really putting into work the philosophy of our culture. So we're really excited to kick it off in this way, because I think as we delve into the next couple of weeks in these conversations, philosophy is sort of going to be sort of that fundamental foundation of this social cultural shift that we are looking at right now. Obviously, it's not new conversation, but people are kind of seeking something different. And I think in order to kind of see any type of change or actions that we are really hoping for and kind of shake away a little bit of frustration, is really breaking down, you know, where are we with our philosophy. So that's kind of why we chose this topic this week. You know, the artists that you're going to be listening to don't necessarily, and really just on the upcoming weeks, is it because they reflect that topic, you know, in like a heavy way, and that's what the concept of the work is. But we do believe that in art, you can find all of these topics very much intertwined and reflected within the work. So,
yeah. Let me add one last thing before we kick it to John. But I think a key thing in American discourse regarding activism and art is we kind of gloss over the role of philosophy and like the language that can influence and refine activism and art. And so we picked this topic today because, you know, we're a culture, a society that prioritizes activism and art for change. And we just need to make sure that we touch upon like all three areas of focus so that the change that we're trying to make in the world can be as effective and impactful as possible. And so that's why I'm also just super excited, because all these facets work in tandem, and the sum is greater than its parts.
Yeah, and you know, so the artists are really able to kind of reimagine a new reality, and that's kind of the reality that everybody's kind of seeking right now. So we'll kick it off with Mr. Jon Henry, Jon with no H, very important. Just so I'm just going to give a quick introduction. So Jon Henry is a photographer is how I actually came to accidentally find your work in a magazine. And I immediately saw it on the cover and I was like, such a strong photo. I need to know who this is. I immediately emailed you, but Jon Henry represents New York. His work reflects on family, socio-political issues, grief, trauma, and healing within the African American community. His work has been published both nationally and internationally and exhibited in numerous galleries, including Aperture Foundation, Macmillan, and BRIC, among others, known foremost for the cultural activism in his work. His projects include studies of athletes from different sports and their representations. And congratulations, I did see, as we're about to mention, is that he was recently named one of Lens Culture's Emerging Artists for 2019 and won the Film Photo Prize for the continuing film project sponsored by Kodak. Lots of big things. Kick it off, Jon. We're really excited to really hear from you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Seda and Barrett, and thank you everyone else for being in attendance. I'm gonna hit the magic screen share button, go here, hit share, and play. Can everyone see the screen? Blink once for yes, blink twice for double yes. All right, perfect. So activism, yeah, that's a really important word and something that's always on my mind as far as, well, it wasn't always on my mind, but has been really at the forefront of the work that I make, which is this project that I'm going to share with you briefly, Stranger Fruit. I just want to start it with a quote from Charles White, the amazing artist. An artist must bear a special responsibility. They must be accountable for the content of their work, and that work should reflect a deep concern for humanity. This project, Stranger Fruit, is an ongoing project. It began in 2014 with this image right here that I created in the church, St. George's Church in Flushing that I used to attend and work in. The project itself was created in response to the murders of African American men due to police violence. You know, I've been around the church for a long time and really glued to religious iconography. So I was already, you know, a bit familiar with the motif of the Pieta, which is something that I wanted to reference. Now, while the project began in 2014, the concept really began in 2008 with the murder of Sean Bell. 2006 is when the actual murder happened, but 2008 was the verdict. Sean Bell was the young man who was murdered at his bachelor party in Jamaica, Queens. I'm born and raised in Queens, New York. So this really, you know, hit home for me and was really impactful. And, you know, something about the images from this really, you know, stayed with me forever. And, you know, I just come back from visiting family in Vienna, and you know, the next day was the Sean Bell verdict. And I remember, you know, the police officers getting off and, you know, just that rush of, you know, reliving that trauma, reliving those ideas that, you know, this had happened again. You know, I was too young for, you know, Rodney King, but, you know, I remember Amadou Diallo and, you know, Sean Bell was really this moment that really just stuck out in history for me. And later that year, 2008, one of my good friends was getting married and I was one of his groomsmen. And at his bachelor party, you know, that's all I could think of. You know, we're just in the middle of New Jersey and it was just like, you know, what if this was happening to him? You know, what if this was happening to us? You know, how are you supposed to explain that to the family, to the mother, to, you know, the people who are, you know, lost, who have to survive in spite of these tragedies? So that's how the, you know, project kind of began. That was 2008, and, you know, the first image didn't happen until, you know, 2014. So I knew I wanted to say something. I wanted to address it. I just really didn't know how. At the time, I just didn't have the visual language to create what I wanted to create. But, you know, I finally came and made this image, and I had to live with it for a long time. I wasn't sure if this was like a standalone image, if this was, you know, a project, if this was something that I was going to pursue long term, or, you know, how long I would pursue it. So I started to do some research. I started to look at different, you know, versions of the Pieta and just different, you know, just see what was out there and see if this is something that I really wanted to pursue. So of course, you know, I began with, you know, the classical renditions of the Pieta, On the left is Michelangelo from 1496, and on the right is by Titian, 1575. And I would go through history and look at all these different versions of the Pietà, and just see what they really meant for me. The real breakthrough in the project was when I came upon these two renditions of the Pietà. On the left, by the amazing Renee Cox, in her piece titled "Ain't Yo Mama's Pietà," and on the right by Dr. David Driscoll, his piece "Behold Thy Son." This was really a breakthrough in the work for me, just because it was this idea of the Black body in art by a Black artist, and the importance that held, us taking, agency over our own body and, displaying it, and us being the authors. So that was really important. And, it was just another way that I could speak about, masculinity and vulnerability and also identity, but then also, focus in on this mother-son connection, this mother-son relationship. And, while I'm talking about it being a mother-son relationship and connection, that's what the project is based off of, as we've seen, just in the past few weeks and the past few months, this, encompasses all Black life. So Black trans matter, Black women matter. Everyone needs to be, fought for in this same vein, because everyone is at risk. Even though this is what the work is talking about, and the work is talking about a direct one-to-one connection, you have to realize that everything is wrapped up in this, and very important. So yeah, the Renee Cox piece was super important, just because I had never really thought about the importance of having a Black artist use the Black body in art. On the right, Dr. David Driscoll, who recently passed away this year, he painted this piece in 1956 called "Behold Thy Son," which was 1 year after the brutal murder of Emmett Till in 1955. He was so impacted by that death and that story that he had to make this. He felt called to make this. He had something, a response that had to be made. And so there are parallels between his response in Emmett Till and my response to Sean Bell. So that's how the project really, began to gain traction and gain its legs. And, we started to work from there. And now it's like, yeah, this is a project. This is something that is worth investigating. This is something that I need to follow through on. And, it's not a New York issue. This is a nationwide issue. I mean, honestly, it's a global issue, but again, trying to keep it as narrow and focused as possible, which I felt would make the work stronger. I had to get on the road. So I started to travel across the country, photographing families, recreating this scene. And again, thinking about, vulnerability and just, what type of protection can we have for these men when, they're outside, and a chance encounter with a police officer can result in death. And for what? For absolutely nothing. So one of the things that, one of the strategies that I use in the work that's really important is this idea of gaze. And it's the mothers looking directly into the viewer, looking directly into camera. And I use that, just again, as a strategy to hold the viewer's attention. There are, we're inundated with imagery, whether it's, Instagram, whatever social media it is, whether you're outside, at a bus stop, train stop, TV, whatever the hell it is, you're consuming millions of images a day. And it's like, okay, well then how, as an artist, what do you use to keep the viewer's attention for, more than 5 seconds? These are things that I'm thinking about while making the work. And again, tying back to research, it really comes from this version of the Pietà by William A. Bouguereau from 1876. And, there's something really arresting about Mary's eyes looking towards camera, where it's really difficult to, walk away from. It's really difficult to encounter the work and then just, leave or keep it moving. So looking at the gaze and why that was so important for the work, and how, you know, that connection, that mother-son connection, but also like engaging with the viewer was really powerful. And you know, other things that were really important to the work, and you know, again, tying back to research, is this you know, just looking at different iterations of different artists and different works that are, you know, were important to, you know, the body positioning going forward. One of them was the work of Kehinde Wiley, and his work, you know, again, using the Black body, and he's directly drawing from, you know, art historical references in the way that he's posing the work. So that was really important for me as well, because now I was able to, you know, release myself from strict representation. I was able to show the work in, you know, show the bodies in different forms and different, you know, constructions. And this would help because a lot of times when I'm meeting up with these families, I don't know how large, what the scale is, you know, the mothers in relation to the sons, or how big they are, how small they are. And if there are multiple sons, you know, how could I, you know, organize the bodies in a way that makes sense visually. You know, continuing on, the work is, while it's, you know, fine art, and you know, goes in a, you know, ends up, you know, fine art typically lives in the gallery or the, you know, museums or whatnot, then the work is also documentary, it's also performance. You know, these mothers have not lost their sons, but they understand the importance of what's going on. They understand that this is something that could happen to them if we don't, you know, properly address this situation. So we have the, you know, the images of the mother and son. You know, the project would not be complete with just that. So I also, you know, have images of the mother just in isolation. And again, this just thinking of, you know, sometimes there's a presence that you can sense that's there, sometimes, you know, not so much. But basically, it's a connection to the mothers who have lost. You know, what is daily life supposed to look like moving forward? What does, you know, how are they supposed to, what's normal supposed to be like after these tragedies have happened? Are they supposed to move on with their lives? You know, and I thought it was interesting just, you know, having this portrait of them not looking at the camera. So now we, you know, again, using it as a strategy for the viewers to then, you know, put themselves in that place, and to, you know, put them into the, you know, into the mother's minds, you know, thinking of, you know, how heavy, you know, this burden must be, and why they have to, you know, deal with this and endure this type of suffering. And, you know, again, how can the environment affect our read of this? Now, the images are my words and the artist statement are my words, but the final portion of the project is the texts from the mothers in the project. So after I, you know, make the images and I complete everything, and, you know, I get back to my neighborhood and I've developed the film and have the final images, I send them the images, but I also send them a short survey, which was what you're looking at now. And having their responses has been incredible for the project. You know, having their words, you know, just ties everything together. So, you know how when you're on Facebook or whatever, and, you know, it tells you that you've been friends with someone for, you know, a year or whatever the hell the reminder is. So in 2016, while I was in Chicago, photographing a number of families, one of the mothers that I photographed the year previously, Nefertiti, she wrote this amazing poem and reposted the image, and the words really just, you know, just blew me away. And, you know, the words just hit me like a bullet. And it was that moment that I knew exactly, like, this was the final, you know, part of the project. This was the final chapter for the work. And this was the poem that she wrote. As I hold my son in my arms, there is nothing strange about him. He is indeed the fruit of my womb, the extension of his father and me, growing, stretching, reaching to the skies. There is nothing strange about him. He is heaven in my eyes, an angel in disguise, handcrafted into a beautiful soul. There is nothing strange about him, for he is the fruit that I have bared, which makes me whole. There is nothing strange about him. He is my son, he is my soul, and he is beautiful. And, even now, still reading it, it still, really, really affects me, because this is, this issue is incredibly real. And of course, with everything that's happened in the last month and a half, you see how it's still of the now. I mean, this project began in 2014, Sean Bell was 2006, Rodney King was how many years ago, and we're still having to have this conversation. We're still having to talk about this. And yeah, maybe now it feels a little different, like we're possibly getting some type of change, hopefully. But again, why does it take, lives lost to make change? So, so this is the project, the project in its full, shape. It is, 3 parts: the mother-son images, the images of the mother, and again, then these text pieces, which is so, so important to the work. And I think we'll leave it at that. I mean, we could be talking about this for forever, but if y'all have questions, I can answer questions.
Thank you so much, Jon. And seeing the work and hearing it over and over again, just specifically to the way that you have, the efforts that you've put to this is still always, it's just so poignant, I just have one specific, I guess, question is something that you had brought up was the sense of the agency of which the ownership of saying, there's so many images on social media and the news and the videos in which it is pushing for people to pay attention and to kind of, be really up in arms to say we demand something to be done. However, it is continuously at the cost of the Black body and dehumanizing the Black body and the repetitive of this image. While, what are your kind of thoughts and emotions on that? Because when I think about why I appreciate your work so much is exactly what you say, is kind of taking ownership of saying, I'm gonna, this is by a Black artist about a Black body. But yeah, I mean, like the sense of overwhelmingness, I mean, I obviously can't speak as a Black man at all, it must be a mixed emotion, I imagine, to see the accountability due to these images being shared, but also, again, the desensitization and the dehumanization of a Black body.
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, obviously, it's for me. I mean, it's a blessing that the work has taken off and really exploded in the past month and a half and 2 months. So that's good. But yeah, it's intense. It's intense that we again, the cost is too high. Like we have to lives are being lost, and now people are, I guess, understanding the weight of all this. The finality of death is like, is that what it takes for people to realize that this is a huge problem and that we need to address it? I don't know. So it's heavy. It's a lot to think about and to, I guess, to endure, but it's also incredibly important. Like the project, I'm aiming to wrap it up within the year. I mean, it would have been working on it this year, but of course all my travel is like delayed with everything else due to COVID-19. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, sorry, my mind is a bit mush right now, but I don't know if that answers it at any in any direction.
No, I feel like that statement question of mine was more, doesn't necessarily warrant a final question, right? It's one of those things that I think that is about the introspection aspect, the introspective aspect of what art is. But yeah, it kind of makes me think about a lot. I have a child in an elementary school in which, you know, they have metal detectors, and thinking about just, again, how this type of work may influence policy on another level, and what are schools doing to sort of perpetuate a little bit of this violence, just sort of nurture, just continuously viewing Black children as, you know, violence, and normalizing that for them, that you see a lot in schools. So, I mean, it hits on so many different levels, you know, it's not just the police brutality, but just violence within the Black community, and normalizing that for children at such an early age.
Yeah.
So really, for me, it's just like, I thank you for your work.
Much appreciated. I mean, then, you know,
And
the work doesn't stop.
just real quick, we have a question from the audience, so I'll let Raquel. Can you hear us? Can we hear?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, you guys. I really appreciate this. And thank you so much for your work, Jon. It's kind of more of a comment. I just wanted to say that the gaze of the moms, the gaze of the women looking directly at me, at the audience, it's just so striking. I think sometimes when you see images like this, often we're turned away, or the subject is turned away, and you don't get to actually look into their faces and see and feel what they're feeling. So I guess, I know you said that you're referencing a piece, and that's why you chose that, but just on a personal level, why do you think it's important, especially for certain audience members, white people, to really have to face the gaze of a Black person?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, the gaze is one of the, you know, most important, you know, pieces, or one of the most important factors in the mother-son images. Again, and it's just like, it was a strategy that I've been using, just thinking about, to hold attention. Because I think, kind of like how you mentioned, like if the mother wasn't looking into the camera or looking into the viewer, it might be easy to look at the image and then immediately leave it. But since the mother is staring directly into you, it catches you in a way where you now, you know, you now start to read the image on a different level, where now you're looking into her eyes, but you're also looking in, let's say we're looking at this image right here. You're looking at the lighting, you're looking at the reflection on the kitchen table, you're looking at, you know, where are they in the house, you know, and then ideas of not even being safe in your own house. You know, Breonna Taylor murdered while she was sleeping. Akai Gurley murdered in his, you know, like his stairwell in his home. I'm forgetting the young man in Houston who was murdered by the off-duty police officer in his own home. She thought it was her home. You know, so you start to have like these, you know, multiple reads of the images, and then, you know, again, if we're just looking at this image, you know, the living son, the other son, looking at his mother for strength, for, you know, to be consoled, or, you know, all these other you know, keywords can pop up in these other multiple reads. And I don't think I would have that if the mother was looking down, or looking away, or, you know, looking off to the side. And then, you know, even, you know, as a couple, you know, folks have always like pointed out in this image, you know, on the coffee table, it says, you know, rise and grind. So there are all these like different levels and different, you know, elements in each image, you know, some more subtle than the next, but yeah, it all centers around the mother looking directly into you and holding that attention, so that it's something that you come back to minutes after looking at it, days, weeks, even a year after looking at it. And then repeating that idea throughout the project. So it's this collection of images where there are, you know, differences throughout, but it's all strung together by, you know, the same theme and the same ideas. So I hope that makes sense and answers the question.
Well, great question, Raquel, and great answer, Jon. And I'm trying to articulate the words for your work, and it's like I just have to sit with it. And that's kind of like the point of art in so many ways, where like we cultivate language to say stuff, yet there's some things that you just kind of have to be speechless and sit with for a while. And that's a good experience to have. And so I appreciated the opportunity to, not rely on words for a while. And with that, I think it's time to go to our next artist. We have an audience. And so Seda is going to introduce the next artist.
Yes, and even though the work leaves you speechless, doesn't mean it's in action. It's a little bit of both. So we have our friend, another New Yorker, actually. Another New Yorker is Miss Tammy Nguyen, a multimedia artist whose work spans painting, drawing, silkscreen, and bookmaking, as for what I know her for. Intersecting geopolitical realities with fiction, her practice addresses lesser-known histories through a blend of myth and visual narrative. She is also the founder of Passenger Pigeon Press, an independent press that joins the work of scientists, journalists, creative writers, and artists who create politically nuanced and cross-disciplinary projects. I am a fan of just paper and print, and especially when they highlight and showcase some very interesting topic and conversation. And Tammy embodies that in her work. But go ahead and kick it up, Tammy.
Thanks so much, Seda. Thanks so much, everyone, for organizing this. It's really fun to be here. It was great to learn about your work too, Jon. Thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you. Let me know that everything works out. 1 second. All right. And everyone can see me scroll through the images.
Oh yeah.
It happened one time where I couldn't, I was doing it and then it didn't work, and so I'm always asking. Anyways, I'm Tammy. I am an artist and I work in a whole bunch of different ways. So I am going to share with you 2 projects today. One is the Color Curtain project, which I worked on with Seda, and Les was one of the guests, and I know Lovely is in the audience. I'm not sure if Adriel is there with Lovely, but I saw your name, so I thought I'd give you a shout out. I'm going to talk about the Color Curtain project from my vantage point as an artist bookmaker, and then I'm going to talk about my current project right now, which is called Filmmaker, the Making of an American Smile. But this first image is sort of a bit of a collage, which represents all the different things that I do. On the top left corner is a picture from my research trip from last year, which became kind of the field work which informed a lot of the projects that I'm doing right now. On the top right is a picture of me and Taya and Lovely and Adriel at the New York PS1 Art Book Fair. Last year, I was lucky to collaborate with Bombshell Toe on a publication called The Atomic Sublime, and there we are presenting it at the fair. At the bottom is one of the studios where I work at in New York City, where I books and do letterpress printing, and in the lower right is my studio in Yonkers, which I haven't been to in a really, really long time, but supposedly it's going to open up soon. This occasion of having artists come together to speak about the diaspora or how we locate ourselves in is really exciting to me. When I think about the diaspora, I think a lot about something that ceases to find a definition, something that really you work towards exploring and seeking clarity maybe throughout your entire life, but it never quite gets there. So as an artist, I very much think about the diaspora and my practice as a sort of a pursuit of trying to tell stories of something that exists in between different spheres. So every time you say one story, you never really quite get to where you want to get, because there's this gap to be created because of generational differences, of of spatial and geological differences. There's so many spaces that one occupies when you come from a legacy of war, a legacy of migration, and a legacy of erasure. So the first project here is the Color Curtain Project, and it was a collaboration with many people actually. So Seda and Lovely, and then there was also Adriel Lewis, Desiree Van Frederick, Erica Shimazu Banks, and also Eric Bruner Yang. And it was an artist book and culinary experience which explored what African and Asian solidarity means in today's tender and contentious political times. On September 29th, 2018, at the grand opening of the Eaton DC Hotel, just blocks away from the White House, we staged an opulent banquet where we brought together near 80 individuals of African and Asian identities, including artists and entrepreneurs and writers and policymakers, to contemplate the necessities and the difficulties and the work that needs to be done to achieve the ideal of solidarity. So here, I think of the act of reading an artist book as combined with the act of breaking bread. And one of the questions that I always ask myself as an artist who's invested in storytelling, is how do you read? Like, how does the audience read in an artistic experience which involves a multiplicity of materials, and in this case, senses? So each dinner guest was gifted with a book, and on the right is an example of the place setting. So this project was inspired by the Bandung Conference of 1955, an overlooked Cold War artifact where 29 African and Asian nations convened in Bandung, Indonesia, to imagine a future not aligned to the West. They aimed to denounce racism, colonialism, and nuclear war. It was a failed enterprise, but it serves as a good case study to examine why solidarity is so difficult to achieve. So my collaborators and I wanted to create an experience wherein solidarity could be challenged in a way that was uplifting as well as unsettling. So we thought a lot about state dinners as a site for discussions where socializing is often intertwined with high-stakes provocations and decisions. The Color Curtain Project takes its name from Richard Wright's memoir on the Bandung Conference called The Color Curtain. Richard Wright, as many of you may know, it was the great African-American writer, and in 1954, when he was an expatriate living in Paris, he saw in the newspapers that 29 African and Asian nations were convening in Bandung. He had never heard of anything like that before, and so he immediately made plans to go. So we used his memoir as a lens to understand the Bandung Conference, in part because Richard Wright was an American who was grappling with many contradictions as he met and interviewed people throughout the conference. In The Color Curtain, you know, he expressed a lot of dismay with some of the African leaders, and he was awestruck by the Chinese premier Zhou Enlai. And then he was surprised by the presence of Eurasians, and he was conflicted about the integration of religion and communism in many people's worldviews. So we did everything that we could to make the guests feel important. And so pictured here is an invitation for the Color Curtain Project, which we hand deliver to every single person. And when our guests opened the invitation, the envelope unveiled a photograph that Richard Wright took once he landed in Bandung. The entire design of the project was also really sensitive to the historical significance of each font. So 3 fonts were used, Courier and Optima, which were used because they were popular fonts during the time of the Bandung Conference. And then Artisan is a font from 2018, and it was created by the typographer named Henry Elam, who works out of Bandung today. So before Richard Wright could enter the conference, he was given a press pass to give him access to cover. Similarly, we created a kind of press pass for our guests, but it included questions to reflect on before arriving to the dinner. So pictured here, you see Richard Wright's original path, and then ours is on the left. And before Richard Wright left for Bandung, he prepared a whole bunch of different questions that he asked everyone that he met. And so Adriel Lewis, who is one of our collaborators, intervened with his text by incorporating different questions that are specific to today's language and the sort of different questions and tensions that were present in Washington, D.C. during the time of our event. So pictured here is a sampling of Richard Wright's questions, and then Adriel's questions are in bold. So here's what the dinner book looks like when it's closed. And what I want you to take note of is that the spine is on the right-hand side. We decided that we wanted this reading experience to have some physical discomfort for our guests. So this book opens up from the right to the left, as many books in the East usually do. Then when you open it up, the book opens up to a coil-bound text block meant to allude to how policy documents are bound. Then there's also a pen and a knife, which were tools to engage with the content. The book broke up into 3 different chapters that correlated with 3 different entrees. Each chapter had a specific formal way of reading, and each entree had a specific ingredient that our collaborative chefs had to use. The first chapter dealt with history through reflection and Chinese 5-spice. The second chapter examined current events through direct engagement and mambo sauce. And the third chapter looked towards the future by unfolding and consuming ketchup. So here's the first chapter, and these are the drawings that are, the original drawings are actually available as part of this event. So if you want to check that out, you can go to the link, I think. But the first chapter was filled with my drawings of the delegates. And I also transcribed many of the speeches, and there was also newspaper clippings of the Bandung conference that I found at the CIA's archive. Many parts of the text could only be read by playing with the reflective cutouts. So if you look at this, you can see that as you turn the pages, that would be how you could read the letters correctly. And as the dinner guests read this, the chef prepared a squid dish utilizing a Ghanaian version of Chinese 5 spices that represented how flavors traveled from the East to West Africa. And then in the second chapter, this is when you took the pen and then you would answer the questions that you received in the invitation. So then as the pressure from the pen pushed into the paper, a secret carbon paper flower was hidden inside of the paper. And then your writing would be transferred onto an image of African and Asian intersectionality in Washington, D.C., as seen in the right image. But in order to see that image, you actually had to take your knife and slice the paper open as seen in the left image. So this chapter also included a center fold out where the knife could be used to scratch away at the gold flowers, which had the names of current entities in Washington, D.C. Then as the gold was scratched away, old names of what used to exist at those current places were revealed. And this engagement was combined with a dish of chicken and mambo sauce. And mambo sauce is a specific tangy, sweet and sour sauce that originated in DC. And then finally we get to the conclusion chapter. And here we presented the final communique of the Bandung Conference, where the nations promised each other dignities such as sovereignty and equality and respect. But when you flip the pages open, there's an essay by Lovely Umayam who warns of the problems within this communique and suggests how these particular countries were at the mercy of the power implied by the atom bomb. So while they had exited their era of colonialism, their new independence was still dependent on the West. And this essay was also presented with facsimiles of Richard Wright's field notes while he was in Bandung. And then as the guests read this content, they were served ketchup shrimp, a dish utilizing ketchup, an ingredient that is, you know, we think of it as being so common, but it's actually a condiment that holds a lot of imperial baggage, as it was brought to Britain by early explorers and eventually transformed by Henry John Heinz into the ketchup that we know today. So I'm always thinking about nuance, the pursuit of nuance. How do you tell a story that is inconclusive? How do you tell a story that is unsettling? How do you tell a story that continues to evolve endlessly, never really finding any place to sort of settle? A word that I often use in my studio practice is confusion. How do I keep the work confusing with a sense of intention, like it's intentionally confusing? So this here is the cover of my first long form written publication. It has been recently published by Ugly Duckling Press and it's available now. It's called Phom Nha, The Making of an American Smile. And it's something that I've been the writing is something I've been working on all year. And I'm really excited and a little nervous about it coming out. But here is one of the layouts. So Phom Nha, The Making of an American Smile is a piece of writing that is held together with a story about how I was born without two of my front teeth. They're called lateral incisors. I'm going to show you. Okay. So when a person reaches pre-adolescent, they so once you find out that you're born without these teeth, they're given sort of this orthodontic treatment as seen in the upper right. Okay, so if you look at the picture on the upper left, you see that person, these are not my teeth, these are Google's teeth. You see that the upper jaw is actually two front teeth, and then next to them are the canines. So there's actually missing teeth in that jaw, even though it just looks like they're spaced out teeth. So usually what happens is the orthodontist will give the teenager or the tween braces. And what the braces do is over time, it will stretch the canines farther and farther and farther away from the two front teeth, while also pushing the two front teeth together so that it looks like the picture in letter C. So that's the lower left-hand picture. And so what ends up happening is this teenager ends up going throughout their adolescence with two huge gaps in their mouth to be sort of veiled with prosthetics throughout most of their teenage life. Then in image D, that is an image of a mouth with flippers. So a retainer with two false plastic teeth that are put there as placeholders for when the teenager grows up and eventually receives implants. So as I tell you this story about my teeth, the writing breaks off into two other narratives, which seem completely unrelated to the teeth. I end up telling you about two different places: Forest City in Malaysia and Phom Nha in Vietnam. Forest City in Malaysia is a 100% man-made island that has been created over the last 20 to 30 years. It's located in the Singapore Strait between Malaysia and Singapore. And it's a tax haven where everything is tax-free, and it's been designed to be a kind of utopian city. It lauds cheap healthcare, hundreds of species of plants supposedly thrive there, and it has perfect climate. In fact, when I went there to visit, the salesperson told me that there's no climate change in Forest City. Phom Nha is pictured on the right-hand side. Phom Nha in Vietnam is a system of caves that are over 400 million years old. It possesses an unmeasurable amount of flora and fauna. And during the Vietnam War, this karst system was also what supported the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was a network of transportation routes for weapons and food and information that many credit to the successful unification of northern and southern Vietnam. The name Phom Nha also means wind carving through teeth. And I use the story of my missing teeth as a way to compare these two very real places, which are made of real earth and fake earth. So the essay tries to reflect on my conflicting value systems of beauty and capital, something that I'm constantly grappling with, and something that, much like what I was speaking about earlier, that I find really difficult to define. To the left is an image of a model apartment that you could buy in Forest City, and to the right is the inside of one of the caves. This is actually the part where last summer, I actually had to swim through this part, so that was pretty exciting. I elaborate on these two different kinds of beauties that I witnessed, and I continue to tell you about how the decision to fix my birth defect was a reflection of a certain set of Vietnamese immigration values in beauty, particularly the desire to have a perfect and quintessential American smile, something that would signify wealth and education. So I love this picture right here on the left. So this is the same unit that was for sale. Many of the rooms throughout Forest City were decorated with these sublime images of nature, often landscapes of North America. And on the right is another image that I took when I was inside of the cave. It was a pretty rigorous tour in terms of physical body strength and endurance. So as the essay continues, my description of these two places start to probe at the conflict about truth. What do I think is real? And then as I reflect on it, I think about this idea of confusion again, and what one actually means to create happiness. And then when the essay concludes, you do learn about how I end up getting the implants, and I take you through the implantation process. So on the left-hand side is an image of titanium abutments, which are meant to hold permanent crowns. And on the right-hand side is an image that pops up when you Google American Smile. And my permanent fake teeth are actually, so the crowns which fit on top of those metal things. And the ones that I have in my mouth now are made out of zirconium, which is a type of porcelain found in sand deposits that have been broken down by the wind. And you would find this kind of mineral in places like Pham Nhat. So moving along, we're here now in almost current day. How do you take a text and then transform it into a visual world? And what excites me about being an artist who works between media is there's always a space in between language and visual language. There's always a space between book and painting, drawing and writing. And that space in between, I think, can give birth to yet another story, right? Another story which fills in the gaps of the things that you tried to say. So I'm going to show you some paintings right now. This is a painting that I made right before, maybe January of this year, before kind of everything shut down in March. I started to think about what rocks and what does geology mean to me as a visual artist. So now I'm transitioning from the language of English and sort of expanding into the world of language as mark making, language as calligraphy, language as painting. This is an image that was inspired by some of the bats and the butterflies that were in Pham Nhat. And then here are two really small paintings that I finished up in January that were sort of exploring bits and pieces of the cave where the light would start to hit the different rocks as you were exiting the cavern. And then COVID happened. So this is where I've been working. This is a picture of my kitchen table. This is where I've been making everything. This is literally where I'm sitting right now. So where my computer is where these paintings are. And what's been really great for me during this time is the opportunity to slow down and to think about language and to think about what it means to create teeth and what it means to create rock and bats and butterflies. And then in turn, what what does the act of drawing and painting then give back to the narrative that I told you about with regards to my piece, Forest City and Pomia? So I'm just going to show you some pictures of things that I've been making for the last 3 months. These are some watercolors, some studies of rocks, studies of plants, butterflies and bats, a little tooth that's growing out of a cave, a whole set of teeth missing the lateral incisors, and finally we're here. So where I am now is I'm thinking a lot about these rocks and about how the creation of rocks or the creation of rocks by man or by nature could be lifted into the air. So here is a picture of me working at the Center for Book Arts just last week. Here I am doing some paper marbling using the Suma Nagashi technique, where sumi ink is just floated on top of water, and then what happens is that you can place a piece of Japanese rice paper, and then it will pick up the sumi ink just like here. And what I'm planning to do is make kites which look like rocks, so that the cave can kind of lift up into the air into a new possibility. And that's what I've got to share. I'll stop sharing now, and I'll take any questions. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Can everybody hear me? These things ran out of battery.
Beautiful, Tammy. I love that everything that you do is, you know, is heavily nuance is so important to you, and I think it's really just important to every element of the conversation, a lot of the social cultural conversations that we're having now. One thing that I wanted to mention, because I know we have to move along, and I know Barrett was going to ask a question, was about the color curtain dish and the mambo sauce. And originally it was just Chef Selassie and Chef Eric that was doing that mambo dish, but in the kitchen there was actually a line cook that was working, and he had his own recipe, and he ended up getting included in the dinners and in the book at the last minute. And I think that was one of the really beautiful moments of just like that dinner, and how significant it was it just like these, you know, the well-known chefs and these really, you know, well-experienced chefs, but it was just someone that, I mean, just like this sauce that represented the city, and this individual that was a very important part of the city that kind of really was the one that really presented the sauce. So I thought that was a really special thing to kind of put out there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So Tammy, I do have a question for you, but I kind of want to hold it till the end after Dominic, so we make sure we get his in at like a good time.
Ooh, the suspense.
And then I'll ask the questions a little later. I hope that's okay.
That's great. Yeah, no objections at all.
You can't go anywhere now.
Yeah. So the next artist is Dominic Green, and he's been a collaborator with SCL for months now, and I'd love to take credit for finding Dominic, but it was actually Jackie, who's on our team, who found his work and was like, I think his work speaks to our like philosophical message, and told me to check him out. And I was like, yes, he does. Let's talk to Dominic. And so now we just kind of collaborate, and I think his work shows a lot of the nuance and complexity of being a Black man, a Black person in society, and our language, our word ethnocide. I think you could use that language and apply it to a lot of his pieces. And so from there, I'll let Dominic take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Barrett. Thank you, Seda. Thank you, Jon, and thank you, Tammy, for just all your wonderfulness. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Okay. First things first, I want to showcase a short film that my partner Ray Keller and I we did together for the Atlas Intersections Festival for this year. It's called Release, and I'll let you watch it and I'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Well, I apologize if you couldn't hear the audio. Saw that I was having a little technical difficulties. See, okay. See if I can. Well, I'll just move forward in sake of time. But what the short film release was about for me, it's really almost like a dreamscape of Black people feeling their emotions. And many things that we see in terms of our imagery and films, I feel as if Black people aren't allowed the representation of just expressing yourself and letting go of trauma. A lot of the times we hold on to trauma and it destroys our bodies from within. And for me, that is something that I want to let go of, i.e., release, because I myself have had problems just letting go of trauma and letting go of just feelings that we are bombarded with on a daily basis. So for me, the film was very much a piece to release ourselves, allow you to see um, just us in a more vulnerable state. And like John mentioned earlier about the gaze, being able to look at people or you're looking at them in their eyes kind of allows you to relate to them. We're not dehumanized. We're not a figment of your imagination. Even though for me, it's very much like a dream of watching people kind of just floating in this whiteness. Because I feel like a lot of the times, especially being in America, you're kind of floating in whiteness. Um, a system of white supremacy is something that is around us every day. That's why we're going through this whole thing with George Floyd. That was just the tipping point. Like, it was kind of like the last straw. So for me, this allowed me to just be able to like releasing just some anger, some pain, some hurt, and everybody needs to release it after a while, or you will kind of implode. But I'll go to my next point. Uh, so I want to talk about some of my photography work. Some of my photography work, well, all of it to me just feels like they're ideas of dreams. I'm very inspired by Leo's Carex and Salvador Dali, Christopher Nolan, Stanley Kubrick. The list for me just goes on and on. I really like to showcase work that just goes through just us kind of escaping from this world and creating a new world. And that's something I think I relate to in terms of SCL, excuse me. Just kind of reinventing our world and showing us how we should be, or not even so much how we should be, but allow us to create our own minds and our own thought patterns and our own verbiage and our own just ways of being a human. So the first piece I want to show it's called A 70s Dream. I took this back in, I believe it was 2014, 2015. For me, it was inspired by a lot of 70s Black art in terms of showcasing the big hair, showcasing the colors, the stripes. I credit a lot of the clothing and makeup to two young ladies that I work with, Mona Bat and Alana McDuffie, because we kind of just created this whole landscape. We went to this amusement park over in Maryland, and we just wanted to take pictures that resemble a time that is kind of left behind. So that is that piece. My next piece is called Sorrow. Sorrow is just my depiction of a Black man going through, again, the emotions and the pain of dealing with a world that's built on white supremacy and not allowing your feelings to come through, and kind of holding on to that for a long time. In the image, we use the old couch. Again, I like the theme of like the 70s and old things, because a lot of my favorite artists are from their primes were like in their 70s. I mean, in the 70s. And so for me, it was very much a point of just showcasing our Blackness, and like coming from work, he's dressed nice, but the world kind of doesn't see him in a way. So it's like he's invisible. He's just there. This picture is also kind of a reference to I never realized how much my work is kind of revolving around the 60s and 70s. This is another piece shot with a young lady named Valerie. She wanted to do a theme, and I wanted to do a theme of what it was like back in the day again. And I like the theme of black and white because it kind of, for me, it kind of puts us back in a place. I like color as well because color can make it seem so current, but to put us back in a place of just where we used to be, and not in terms of racism or anything like that, but in terms of just hearing old stories of how our families were and excuse me, how families were, and just learning about just the past. For me, the past is so important because if we don't know where we come from, we can't kind of know where we are and know who we're going to be. So I'm a big believer in knowing thyself, and in knowing thyself, you must learn of yesterday. So, and I'll go to my next slide. This one's called Empty. Uh, Empty again is something that kind of showcases for me. Thank you, Barrett. Nostalgia. Thank you. I couldn't find a word. Empty for me is again another thing of us showcasing like Black men, and I hate that that I kind of show us in a way sometimes, but a lot of the times this is how I'm feeling in terms of how we go through our lives. Me personally, I've dealt, especially in being working at a hotel. A lot of people would come there and look down upon me, and in ways, it's hard for it to not impact you, not make you feel as if, well, this whole world is looking at me and I'm just lesser than, and it's not the truth. But if we're always shown that we are lesser than or told through history of science and things like that, it's very much a hurtful thing, and kind of it wears you down, and living in with this burden placed upon your back of being lesser than or not being the quote unquote superior race, which is, in my opinion, kind of idiotic, because we're all human beings and no one's really superior to anybody else. Everybody's just different and has different experiences and different ways of thinking, different ways of being. But for me, that's what this image represents. And this is another image for me representing our masculinity. This is one of the artists that I use. This image is like an outtake from my series that I did with the Nicholson Project called Perception Times Agency. And I'll put the link in the chat. For me, this image just represented how we sometimes look and how people perceive us in our everyday life. Like the man in the photo, Eric, he's a phenomenal actor, the Shakespeare work, all that kind of stuff. But you'll never know it by looking at him or how he's dressed in his photo. And Harlem being such a big contributor to our culture in terms of like the Harlem Renaissance and just how it's been built up. How it was built up back in the day. I thought it was just interesting because people wouldn't know that by looking at him. And I think I like to play with that idea, the idea that you never know who you're talking to, and you never know the person that is next to you. Again, we're all different, but our differences and our uniqueness make us who we are and kind of make the world. But when we're marginalizing people and harming people for our differences, kind of destroys us in a way. So, and this is a photo I have of Dior Ashley Brown. She's a local DC artist. She's just an amazing artist. I was taking this one of her performances. She always sticks up for Black Power and sticks up for the people who don't have voices. And for me, this image just captured, again, kind of a nostalgic feel. But for me, it just was something that's just powerful because that microphone, when people are holding that microphone and holding your attention, I think it's nothing more powerful. And then the words that you say out of that microphone really can determine a lot, because people are influenced by you, whether you think so or not. And I just felt like this image kind of spoke to that. And then this image for me, it's called a flame. It's just a representation of kind of just African or facial features in a way, because some, like, her lips are very exaggerated, but that's just how she looks. And I thought it was just beautiful, and it's a fire. If you talk to the young lady, she's very just strong and passionate. And for me, that was just another thing that just really drew me in, and was like, this is amazing. Because when I'm shooting with people, I'm not just shooting with them in terms of to get a nice image. I'm shooting with them because they all have a story. So all of my works are very collaborative. And I think in getting to know them kind of helps me create the imagery, and just learning her and learning what she does, and, you know, what she has gone to school for, and just that whole thing kind of helped me to understand why I do this and why I take images of Black people, and understand that we all have stories to tell, no matter how you look, or again, how you look or who you are. We all have stories to tell, and it's very powerful. And that's about it. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Dominic. It's funny at this point, we've collaborated enough where, like, I look at your work and I see, like, my words, and then I get to the point where I chime in on the chat and I give you, like, the words to help you articulate what you're trying to say. And so it's I don't know, it's an interesting experience seeing your art at this point, because we've been doing it a lot. So at this point, we've seen all the artists. So everybody in the audience, if you have questions, please drop into the chat. I do have a question for Tammy, like I said, like I promised. And so one of the things I was struck with your art was, like, the intersectionality between, like, African American movements and Asian movements, like Asian and Asian American movements. And I'll say, like, one thing that has intrigued me with my work is, like, my work, I don't speak to any particular audience. I'm not trying to, like, cater to, like, African Americans or white people or whatever. And some of my, like, best, most supportive people have always been Asian Americans with my work. And so I could see that with your work. I just kind of was thinking, like, how does that connection between, like, the African American and Asian or Asian American community represent to you, or what connection do you see?
I see them as, like, kind of a matrix of a lot of complicated connections, and some of them are positive, and some of them are contentious, and some of them are, you know, evoke anxiety, and some of them are also really loving and uplifting. So I think of all of that as a big amalgamation of complex identities that come from all sorts of narratives of the diaspora. However, I think that it's important for me to put some of those narratives side by side, because I think that a lot of times narratives are easier told when they have singular trajectories, right? And so it's much more complicated to tell stories in a sort of multi-layered way across time and space, right? So that's just something that I think is just really important to me as an artist. Going back to that word again, confusion, right? The more and more juxtapositions of histories and identities that you kind of put together, the more confusing the condition tends to be. And I think that confusion is a really exciting and honest place for me to express ideas as an artist.
Perfect. That was helpful. That makes sense.
I thought you were gonna ask something about the dental work.
Ah.
I tragically have never had braces, so so anybody in the audience, if you guys have any particular questions you'd like to ask, please put them in the chat, and this is the moment to talk to any of the artists. I have a question for Dominic. Do you have a question for Dominic Seda, or you want me just to go?
Oh, before you actually ask your question, I just wanted to say it was special to actually finally see Dominic and his work. I've met Dominic through events, and he's just been so very silent in the background and just participating, doing his thing, very, just listening. And I love learning more and seeing how deep some of the work that you have and what you're putting out there. So I just wanted to say I appreciated that. And a very nice shirt for the talk tonight.
All shirts. Okay, so Raquel has a question. So here we go. I'm gonna, boom.
I just wanted to say again, thank you for everyone. And Tammy, seeing your work, it definitely helped me realize basically how much I feel like white supremacy pits minorities against each other. I know for myself, I try to shed the fact that I'm a Black whatever, right? Like I consider myself a writer first, just like I consider myself a mother. But in seeing your work and just even in this discussion, it really helped me realize just how I think it takes away from all of us that we have to walk around with these labels, that they have to be so important to us. And ultimately it does become a feature of your work, but it shouldn't have to be, right? Like I appreciate what you do for the fact that you do it, not because you're Asian American, you know what I mean? But it has to become an important part of your identity in order for you to speak to the majority, So I appreciate what you do. And I thank you for being thoughtful about your identity and in terms of like what you want to share with everyone. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. There's a question in the chat about the color curtain. How long did it take to make the dinner book? It took a long time, but it didn't take that much time in weeks, but it was really stressful because by the time we got all of the content in New York, my team and I worked pretty endlessly binding everything by hand. So I don't know. We had a lot of accidents too. I mean, it's hilarious. There was this one day where everything was hole punched and everything was printed, but then the holes didn't align with the binder, and we had to reprint in like 24 hours. So it took many, many hours. I want to say by the time we got content from all of the different people, it took basically about 1 month, but every single day consistently and late into the night. An addition of, I think we made about 100 of them.
All right. Okay. So I wanted, Raquel's comment actually reminded me of a philosophical theme that's like quite important to this event. And it's, and we all touched upon it, all three artists touched upon it. But it's a different distinction between like essence and existence. And essence is this like European philosophical idea from Descartes that starts with like, I think, therefore I am. So what happens is people, they would say their thoughts are what determine that they exist or not. But like existence determines that you exist, so being. And I think what we're talking about regarding like race and stigmas and like the burdens that we have based on like living in like a white supremacist environment is that we get attacked via an essence that has been like thrust upon us. And we're trying to propel and articulate the importance of our existence as people and the diversity and all the nuances that happen with that. And you can see that with Jon Henry's work, the importance of like Black existence and the trauma that is being thrust upon us generationally, like over and over again. I thought with Tammy's, the example of Richard Wright, who studied in Paris with Sartre and all the existentialists, and how his work speaks to that experiential component of existence, and clearly Dominic's work also, when you show like just the raw emotion of people, like that is an experiential, existence focused way of understanding life. And I think we focus so much on essence in America, we actually need art and language to remind people the importance of existence.
Ooh, we're getting some good questions in. I will say for Dania, John actually had to step out of the call because he had another commitment. But we'll send him this question that you have. I'm going to ask Dominic, how are other portrayals of Black men important in your work?
Good question. Other portrayals of Black men in my work are, they're very important. And I say this because when I have a bond, I guess, with another Black man, it puts me in a place of, I have some kind of importance. And not that my existence is important because of another person, but it allows me to know that I'm not the only one that's going through these things. And being able to portray other Black men for me is important because, never actually thought about it. It's important because it allows me to showcase a different kind of imagery. Historically, we've been shown images of Black men as savages, as brutes, as many different negative stereotypes. So for me to portray other Black men, not so much in a negative stereotype, but to put them in a place where they can showcase them full selves and not just be held in a box, is what I'm always trying to get across. Because I know I myself have been put in a box when people speak to me or people meet me or anything like that. So being able to showcase us outside of this box, and not just a box of whatever stigmas, but in showcasing our masculinity in a different way, much like how Jon was doing, showcasing masculinity and vulnerability. I think that's what's most important to me in working with other Black men.
Yeah, I think that relates a little bit to that question for Jon, which was the choice of having to stay away from showing as in the question, a gory side of an image of a Black individual, Black man, and why he's always chosen to stay away from that and just have the lifeless body, and that the lifelessness of a body doesn't necessarily, there's so, at least in the image, there is something of a beauty in a relationship and an actual life and human behind this, in a relationship with mother. That so it gives you time to, it forces, it sort of shifts that image of what you, Dominic, are fighting for, or what your project is so important for you and your work. Is kind of changing that narrative in the image. So thank you for that. Another question. This is a good one. Nuance. Hello, Tammy, and really for both of you, please. But can you all speak about your processes in teasing out the nuances of your work? Who do you talk with? Where do you go? Do you get submerged in your work? Or is it a chance of serendipity that lead you to various directions toward a possible conclusion?
That's a really that's a very multi-layered question. I think that when I was at school, I went to graduate school right after living in Vietnam for 4 years. And that experience of living in Vietnam was something that really transformed my gaze. The gaze is something we've talked about a bit tonight, especially in Jon's presentation. Things kind of collapsed for me in Vietnam. The ideals that I thought were true, the values that I thought I had, were all kind of twisted and kind of bent out of shape by the time I returned to America. I had even forgotten to speak like an American because I hadn't, spoken about certain topics in so long. And I found that when I wanted to talk about this situation, it was really difficult to talk about it, also make work about it with an audience that was predominantly American. Granted, a very sort of, diverse American audience, but nonetheless an American audience. And I'll tell you a story. So I made a painting of my grandmother turning into a bird. One of the things I was thinking about a lot was death. And this bird looked so stupid. It was like the worst bird you've ever seen in your life. It was just basic, and I clearly didn't know what a bird looked like. And so I was encouraged by a professor to go study birds, and I did. And I became a taxidermist at school, and that was my job as a graduate student. So every Friday morning, I would go and I would cut birds up and stuff them for the library collections, and then I would draw them from observation. And then through learning about the stories of the birds, I was able to tell the story about how I felt contradictory feelings in Vietnam. So this idea of the proxy is where I started to begin this journey and this process of thinking about nuance. Like, my audience is never going to share my particular background, my particular anxieties about what I feel and what I see in the world. But how do I take them on this journey? And I love this idea of using a placeholder to talk about something else, right? So the caves, to talk about this issue of Vietnamese diaspora's fixation with capital and wealth and American values, right? With African and Asian solidarity, right? The dinner becomes this proxy to get to this other thing. So whenever, I guess that's a really important part of the process for me, which is that whatever topic I'm interested in, what are the different sort of layers I'm going to put in front of the viewer to look at the topic through multiple lenses and filters.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
This is a good sort of comment question too from Anthony. When speaking about the man you photographed who does Shakespearean work, you said you wouldn't know that by looking at him. How can we start to get to a place where we could see or imagine that he does that kind of work, since not thinking that it's possible means that the oppressor has won? I say think as an African-American male who's a trained classical opera singer. Before you answer that, Dom, I think that's the reason why, this conversation we're having in the series that we're having is important, about shifting, decentralizing, the questions that we're asking, that as we're doing the work and, highlighting the artists that are a reflection of self, it's still so much within the context of a white space. But you go ahead, Dom.
What's the specific question? Like within that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it seems like it's not necessarily a very specific question, but I think it's sort of a thought for all of us, right? How can we collectively get to a place where it's this assumption of, you wouldn't know that by looking at him. And that's.
I think you can get past that place by, I think on a grander scale, owning the imagery that you put out. And I say that because a lot of the times we don't own the platforms that put the imagery of whatever we're looking at out. We are subjected to people to choose what kind of images we see. So in return, that changes our mindset of how we interact with people. So I'll use an example of, what's the film? It's the film that came out in like the early 1900s. I can't think of the name right now. It's but it dealt with the KKK and showcasing Black people in that way, and like Black men. Yes, thank you. Birth of a Nation. And seeing Birth of a Nation, it created this whole aura of Black people are savages, Black people are monsters, we rape white women as Black men. It created this whole narrative. So I think to combat that or to change that, we have to change the imagery and the narratives that we put out, like from here on out. And again, by doing that, it's kind of by owning our own platforms. And I don't, it's not going to be an overnight process, because these are things that have been ingrained in us since birth, basically. We've seen this imagery repetitively every day of our lives, essentially. So it just starts with kind of today, and having these forums like you and Barrett have put together, say to talk about these things, to understand that things need to change, and not just be stuck in such an antiquated like way of thinking, because that's all it is. We're stuck in ways of thinking that have been placed upon us year after year, day after day, and it's just something I think that we have to change, you know, on a grand scheme and in our day-to-day interactions. Just understanding that you don't know who you're dealing with on a day-to-day, and we shouldn't just base all our opinions off of just how someone looks, because you don't know. So.
Perfect. So I have one last question for the two of you guys, and then we'll wrap it up. But I'd like to thank both of you guys for coming, and everybody for attending and staying. I hope everyone's had a really good time. And we're recording all this too. And so yeah. So my question for the two of you is, do you guys feel or believe that your art often serves as like a necessary language for when you can't find the words to articulate what you see and or experience? Either one can go.
Do you want to go, Tammy? Or?
I'm thinking if I could go, I'd go. I'm thinking. Well, sometimes I don't really know what I'm saying, you know, so that's kind of a difficult one too, right? Like I do think of like the experience of art, the experience of literature, the experience of poetry are, I mean, I definitely see them as more processes from the viewer's point of view and the artist's point of view. So I do see it as a constant kind of dialogue, even if the dialogue is one where, you know, you're just at a gallery and absorbing the painting or something like that, or if you're sitting alone with a book or something and you're just absorbing the book, right? Of course, with the Color Curtain project, there's like, you know, there's all sorts of different experiences that are happening there. But I would say that I center the process of engagement and not necessarily the message. And I think that, you know, that excites me, because then the process kind of changes over time, and for a lot of great artworks for me, the process of engaging with it throughout many years is really like spiritually fulfilling. You know, it allows me to arrive at a new point of clarity, only to, you know, find something else that will kind of distort that clarity, and it just keeps going on and on and on. But I do kind of, you know, think of art and what I try to do as a kind of process of seeking some kind of salvation or something like that.
Perfect. All right, Dominic, you're on the spot.
For me, a lot of the times I don't know what okay. A lot of the times don't know what exactly I want to say, much like Tammy, until kind of the project is over, because everything I'm doing is kind of a journey to something. It's not, I'm going in with a mindset of this is everything I want to do, so let's do it. Like, working with me is very collaborative, because I'm not just coming from the mindset of it's just all of my thoughts or it's just all of my whatever. I'm kind of just taking a journey step by step to uncover more so in my art what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking or what message I'm trying to get across. Because a lot of the times when I'm working on stuff, the things I go into a project with aren't the things that I leave with or the things that I've created. It's very different from start to finish. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it totally answered my question, because both of you guys had pretty similar answers that you expressed completely differently, where it's like the art precedes the words in many ways. And like, it reminded me, because Dominic, you mentioned Stanley Kubrick as an inspiration. I'm a big Kubrick fan myself, and his movies, they'll take forever. And they were like, why does he do like so many takes and yada yada? And he said, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want. And so he'll have all sorts of variations, and then he'll find it. And then once it's found, then there's like a word for it. That was really enlightening. That was helpful. We're wrapping up. Seda has some stuff she wants to close out with.
Yeah.
Reminders and things.
Reminders and homework. No, I'm kidding. No, thank you all for joining. And, philosophy and art is so intertwined, and as it relates to just action and politics, you are kind of the movers, and whether you intend to be or not, because it's your reflection of the people and the thought and everything that we go through. So thank you all for joining in for our first one and being really patient about everything that is going on and happening, all new. But we will be sending the follow-up email. You'll be able to access this Zoom session again. You can review it again. You'll have contact of the websites of all the artists that participated today. And next week, same time, same place, same time, we'll be covering heritage and identity. So it'll be a very fun one. And you'll be able to use the same Zoom link, but we'll just please register so if anything were to happen, you guys will get an updated link. Feel free to send us any emails. There's also every Sunday, the Sustainable Culture Lab also does a newsletter called The Word. And it's in a sense, it's a little bit of homework in a way. Like, read it. It'll be really helpful as we kind of take this month to sort of this discourse.
Yeah. The Word, we send out a new word every week to give you something to meditate for the week. And it's a Sunday email. We try to get it to you when you're not getting bombarded with a bunch of spam. You can take some time to think about it, and then you get a brand new word each Sunday. So check it out. It's, the website for SCL is scl.community, and, check us out. But I really appreciate everyone coming, bearing with us. Next week, we will have far fewer technical glitches, and we'll be So thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. It was really, really fun. It's so nice to meet everyone virtually.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.